Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Web Platform Podcast, episode number 153. Today we're talking about Microsoft Edge and, what's happening in 2018. We are your hosts today, Justin Ribeiro and Amal Hussein. Amal, hi, how's it going?
Hi, it's going awesome. I'm super excited to have Patrick here today.
I know we've got a great. We're going to talk about the future. I love talking about the future of the web and things. I'm just going to continue saying it for the rest of the for at least Q1. I really think this web thing's taken off this year. I really do. I think it's there. But before we introduce our guest this week and talk about what's new in Microsoft Edge and what's going on, we're going to throw it over to Leon with This Week in the Web in 2 minutes or less. Leon.
Thank you, Justin. So first of all, there's a new version of the V8 JavaScript engine. That's version 6.5, which has just been released. It includes a new untrusted code mode in response to Spectre, and includes streaming compilation for WebAssembly, and of course some speed improvements. TypeScript 2.7 has just been released. This includes loads of new stuff such as stricter class property checks and better JavaScript module interoperability. WebStorm 2018.1 is now available, which includes some nifty features for Vue.js developers. A new JavaScript library called Greenlit has just been released, which allows developers to put async functions on their own thread with web workers. And a new SEO audit tool is coming to Chrome's Lighthouse extension, which should be pretty useful indeed. And that's everything from me for This Week in Web.
Thank you, Leon. Some interesting stuff this week in the web. So, speaking of interesting things, we are talking about Microsoft Edge today. And our guest this week probably needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. Patrick Kettner. Patrick, hello. Welcome to the show.
Hello. How's it going?
Good to talk to you again. Good to see you.
Yeah.
So for those of who don't know who you are, tell the listening audience out there a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Patrick Kettner. I'm a program manager at Microsoft for Microsoft Edge. It's a super boring sounding title that doesn't really explain what I do. What I do is a little bit of everything on the browser except for writing C code, at least full time. I think they've gotten me to write about 2 full lines of C since I started here. I do all kinds of different stuff. I'll help maintain open source JavaScript libraries or other web libraries. I will go to conferences and give talks. I work on different standards bodies to help make the future of this web thing that seems to be picking up speed, like you said. And just kind of have a little bit of everything that I get to play with on the browser. It's really sort of a dream job. I'm also one of the maintainers of Modernizer, and I'm a web developer from my background. Like, I've worked on a lot of major websites in my past, so I'm the least managery manager hopefully you'll ever meet. And really excited to be here today to talk about what we've been working on Edge.
I should also point out, you have one of the coolest business cards, I think, for a web developer I've ever seen. Like, I think I'm going to take a picture of it and just kind of highlight out your phone number on it. But it's just I'm sorry, I just really love that business card.
No, thank you so much. I worked with a wonderful designer, Brittany Kohler. I believe BrittanyKohler.com. Hopefully I can give it to you in the show notes. She did a phenomenal job with the design of it. I've been really happy with it.
Oh, wow. I can't wait to see this business card. Is there like a superhero on it, or is it like your face superimposed on a superhero?
Well, if you think of me as a superhero, it has a superhero on it. It's mostly just a really well-designed illustration. It's a high-quality card. Brittany did an amazing job. She's a phenomenal designer and illustrator, and she's done some really fun stuff.
So. Oh, that is so cool.
I appreciate a good business card. I also appreciate the fact that you did work on Modernizer, which I think if, Modernizer, as someone who used Modernizer for many, many years and still uses it in some projects, thank you. And thank you to all the people who worked on Modernizer. Really valuable tool when it came to, testing for not user agent, but rather for features of the web. Which I think, I think you talk about feature testing and all the wonderful features we're getting to in the web, which we're going to talk about today here in the context of Edge and things. That really sort of started, I think, change the tide when you look at the web as a whole.
Oh, absolutely. And, I really think my work on Modernizer, I am the maintainer for a number of years. it was one of the reasons why Microsoft reached out to me to join the Edge team, because I don't think it's a secret to anyone who's listening to this that, for a long time, Microsoft was kind of the enemy for a lot of web developers, at least in spirit. I mean, having to develop for IE 6 or 7 back, 5-10 years ago was really frustrating experience for most developers. And, Modernizer and having that sort of feature detection method of modern web development was really a huge shift in the browser and for browser development. And, when Microsoft started rechanging and rethinking the way of how to make a good web browser with Microsoft Edge, they looked out to the ecosystem for people. And I was lucky enough to be one of the ones that was selected to join the team to kind of help make sure that the web developer's voice goes into what features are actually shipping in the browser, as opposed to, ActiveX and Silverlight being the only thing that you get.
So Patrick, I'm really, really happy to hear that, the Microsoft Edge team is that committed to web interoperability. And, the web is an open and interoperable platform, and IE has for many years been, like you said, the bane of developers' existence. And so it's awesome that they hired, someone who has so much experience with interoperability to kind of help join and lead the feature team.
Yeah, no, it's been wonderful to be a member of the Edge team. I'm humbled to be with so many talented people, and I'm the one that feels lucky to be here. We do put a huge amount of energy into our interoperability work for multiple reasons. One, we want our users to have the best experience possible, and therefore we want to make sure as many websites work in our browser as possible. And that that's both making it so that we work on the standards bodies to make sure that we can all have code in the future that is fun to and works across all browsers the correct way. Exciting stuff like service workers, and it also means doing stuff like implementing WebKit prefixes inside of Edge in order to make sure that those CSS features that web developers wrote 10 years ago and are likely to never update on certain websites will work for users in the past. We have a number of people focused on interoperability here. One of my coworkers, Scott Lowe, does a phenomenal job with that as well, and tracking down all kinds of bugs and features. And we also get to work with wonderful people from other browsers, like Mozilla has Poch, who was just on, and Mike Taylor, another wonderful guy running the Web Compat project over at Mozilla. We get to work with all major browsers to make the web a better place for users and developers, and it's a super cool job to have.
That is so awesome and exciting to hear that. I'm also proud to say that I personally am somewhat part of the extended Edge team, as Boku is helping Microsoft Edge work on, getting ready to hopefully join the web platform test project. And so we're really excited to be working with the Edge team on that. And so, I'm wondering, does the legacy and, kind of trying not to break the web is it's a much harder thing for Microsoft as a company, because you guys have such a long history. And so what's it been like for a company that has like literally the entire history of the web, right, to make sure that nothing breaks while still pushing forward on a new browser? So how does that work for you guys?
Oh no, yeah, no, it's a Herculean task. I mean, keep in mind CSS first shipped in IE3, and its first usable version was in IE5. Like IE has been around forever. We invented Ajax, or I didn't do anything, but I like to take credit. But yeah, no, it's a huge amount of the web's history and legacy came from IE for a long time. It was really the best browser, even for developers. And unfortunately, that changed over time, and now we are wanting to win back developers and let them know how much we care about them. But it's been a really interesting and fun experience trying to move it from what IE became into a more modern engine with Edge, and a big part of that was removing old legacy features, stuff like ActiveX and simplifying things like group policies or all these other more enterprisey kind of boring things were things that eventually could get removed or reduced inside of our engine. And while for most web developers it was a boon, it was wonderful to have a simpler code base and a simpler browser to write against that was more was updated more frequently and more standards compliant. There certainly has been places in the enterprise, in certain governments that basically required those old features in IE. And so another big part of our job is trying to modernize a lot of these old enterprise applications that were written 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or other even legal requirements. There are some countries where effectively users have to use Internet Explorer because in order to file like their taxes or do certain types of e-commerce purchases, they have to use things that are only available inside of ActiveX plugins. And we obviously want to work with those companies and those various suppliers of those ActiveX plugins to modernize the experience so we can push the whole web forward. It's not been easy, but it certainly has been worthwhile, and it's been wonderful to see a huge change in perspective on the web at Microsoft.
It is interesting to me to see sort of that shift, because I know there's, to some extent it was the running joke, right? Oh, the i6 of things and whatnot.
Right.
But one is that you bring up a very valid point, is that IE6, people forget, because if you're new to web development, you've just come into it. IE6 was actually rather cutting edge at the time. It was by
phenomenal.
far, it was phenomenal. Like, I know we built lots of stuff for IE6.
Yeah,
because it did everything fast and it was cool, and it
no. I mean, at the time, Netscape 4 was what was terrible. That was the IE6 before IE6.
Oh yeah, 4 was atrocious. People don't remember this.
The problem was, imagine using a 10-year-old phone, but using a 10-year-old browser is a very frustrating experience when it never updates. It wasn't the problem with the browser; it was the problem that the company never updated the browser effectively. They felt like they won the web, and we could just move on.
Yeah,
and replacing the web.
Well, right, and I think that there were. I think a lot of developers, even at Microsoft at the time, were saying, "Yeah, no, we want to move too," but there were issues with that. One is that enterprise had their own ideas of things, because enterprise never wants to ever touch code that ever runs again because maintenance. And that from a developer standpoint, that was its own nightmare. Like I've been in that spot. We still have people on IE7, which confounds me. It's
condolences.
Oh, the wake is next week. But now you're sort of in this new sort of world, right? Where all of a sudden you're making the big push, and Edge is coming, and Edge is here. And, what's new and wonderful in Edge? Like, is it, a lot of people think, oh, it's just IE, with new things, but it's really not, right? That's not the case at all.
No, I mean, while there has been a huge amount of legacy in our IE engine and our Trident engine, the thing that powered Edge for a long time, powered the browser for a long time, Edge is not like a new user interface over IE. It's a completely new engine. There are certainly legacy parts because Edge is a part of the operating system. It's a very, very low level. And so things it's very, very low level. And so it leverages parts of like the rendering pipeline inside of the operating system that we're able to do because we own, everything from the operating system to the end user. As a result, there are pieces of code that would have been shared between IE and Edge, but it's a very small amount. It is effectively a brand new browser. Certainly way more so than like what Blink was when it split off from WebKit. It's not a rename or a fork. It's a new browser, and a multi-year effort to get us to where we are today. And
that's so cool.
It really does represent a modern way of thinking of web development inside of Microsoft, and recognizing how important the web is and how much investment we want to put into it to make sure that developers have a wonderful experience while developing for Microsoft browsers.
That's amazing. But could you talk about the different layers, Patrick? So that where does Chakra fit in versus your rendering engine?
Sure. Yeah. Just a side note, you were cutting out a bit, Amal, so I'm sorry if I'm cutting you off or anything.
Oh, no worries.
No, that's fine. So yeah, sure. So that gets into a bit of how browsers work, which I love to go into. I'm a big nerd about this sort of a thing. So technically, there's two different Edge teams at Microsoft. There's the Edge app team and the Edge HTML team. Edge app are the people that make the user interface for the Edge apps that you see, things like the menus, the bookmarks, all that sort of thing. I work on Edge HTML, which is the rendering engine. It's a web view. If you've ever used like a Cordova app or implemented any kind of a web interface, either in Windows or anything, that thing that you would implement is what we make on my team. It's the rendering engine for the browser. And so what a rendering engine is the thing that kind of brings in all of the code, the JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and then it does stuff with it. It eventually will render that code to the end user and put all the pixels on the screen and, paint it there and deal with all the interaction from the user or the mouse or whatever. What Chakra is the JavaScript engine. It's similar to SpiderMonkey on Firefox or V8 at Chrome. The idea with that is that they are independent JavaScript engines that can be loaded anywhere, just like a web view can be useful in places outside of a browser. A JavaScript engine can be useful outside of the browser too. And so we have it separate. And Chakra is actually completely open source, available on GitHub. And you can even use Chakra as a backend for Node. So there's actually a number of performance enhancements if you use the Chakra-based engine for Node rather than the V8 version for Node. They're in a very healthy competition between the two teams to constantly release features, be more secure, be better for battery life, or all these different features. And it's been really, really cool to see more and more pieces of our stack become open source and public, like Chakra has.
That's incredible. And so I mean, with first of all, that's, I mean, if, most people don't even realize that like a big chunk of Edge is actually open source, right? That's super cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
And do you think that Edge as a whole will ever be open source, or are there just too many kind of proprietary APIs under the hood? Just curious.
Well, I certainly hope so. We don't, obviously, this is not going to be a huge Oprah moment where I reveal something, unfortunately, but it's something that's, personally important to me and a number of people on the team, open source in general. And it's something we would certainly love to be able to accomplish. There's all kinds, like you said, of proprietary pieces of code and other parts that would have to be changed over time. As you can imagine, inheriting code that in some cases is decades old, there's all kinds of features that need to go through, and security checks and legal checks and all these other things in order to make something public, especially as a company as large as Microsoft. However, it would be wonderful, hopefully one day, but I don't know. It's unfortunately above my pay grade.
Yeah, no, thank you for answering that without again, saying too much, but not saying too little. Mm-hmm. So thank you. And so Edge, I think for many people who might have seen the article that just came out this week, Edge is now faster than Chrome and Firefox. And so, like you said, when you think about the fact that Edge is so low level, right? It's tied to the OS, all this cool battery improvements. I mean, for me, I love Chrome, but it's such a drain on my battery, it's why I run Firefox whenever I'm on the go. And so, could you kind of elaborate a little more on some of the cool improvements you've made to kind of get to that benchmark?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's, that's the big strength that we have as a browser is that we, can talk to the people that make the operating system we're running on right across the street. Not only that, since we're only focused on Windows, we don't have to build the abstractions that Chrome or Firefox do in order to make their code run across all browsers. It's stink to have to implement the exact same video codec on 5 different platforms. Every time something changes, have to rechange it on 5 things. So you build those abstractions just like we do as JavaScript developers to make that code easier. And every time you add that abstraction, it makes stuff slower. It's unfortunately one of the reasons why Chrome is such a battery and performance hog. And I don't mean to dismiss the wonderful work that Firefox or that Chrome has done. They do wonderful work, but it's just we're in the lucky position to only have to focus on the one operating system, so we're able to be much more performant. As far as the stuff that we've done in order to make our browser more performant, there's a ton of low-level changes, especially in this most recent update that's coming out soon, what we call internally RS4. That's actually a reference to a version of Windows that comes out since we are directly tied to the operating system and operating system updates. RS4 had a ton of performance updates and a ton of low-level tweaks to make the experience of using our browser much more smooth, palatable, wonderful, etc. And so there's not like one gigantic feature that landed, but there's all kinds of little tweaks that came in. Stuff like independent rendering. So what that means is that normally if you go to a website and you're scrolling around on it and there's some really horrible ad that gets loaded in the background and constantly thrashing the page, it gets really, really buggy to kind of like scroll or interact with the page. Excuse me. And so it makes the experience really, really gross. However, most of the time on those pages, you're not really trying to do deep interactions. You're just wanting to like scroll or read a page or something like that. And so what we do, we have this, we have various kinds of what we call independent rendering, where basically the rendering pipeline or the rendering process is completely separate from, say, the scrolling process or the JavaScript process. As a result, that means that even if you're having like a while true loop where everything's clogged up and slow and that you can't actually execute any code, the user will still be able to interact with the page as though it was a completely open stack on JavaScript. It's a lot of little tweaks like that that allow us to get to a more faster experience for the user and more faster rendering changes. And then on top of that, there's just constantly, evaluating and benchmarking our JavaScript engine, our rendering engine, our code parsing engine, our code caching engine. We have all kinds of stuff inside of the browser that we're, just constantly improving.
It must be difficult in that regard because a lot of times people look at the performance gains within any browser and they say, this is great for, my use case. I can now do more as a developer against it. But really,
Sure.
As a vendor of browsers, you're really having to fight sort of a lot of the bad practices that have sort of popped up in web development. I mean, we talk about the notion of scrolling on the web. Well, why is scrolling so bad? Why are we having to deal with this now? We never had to deal with it before. Well, maybe don't try to run terrible, terrible ad code on every single screen that exists. I don't know. Maybe that's a thing. I mean, that must be incredibly difficult to continuously have to deal with as you're dealing, because these are not little top level changes. You're talking about core feature set.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, well, honestly, to push back for a little bit, I wouldn't necessarily say it's like difficult to prevent that. Quite the opposite. It's actually our job to enable that as browser vendors. Like, I want to be able to let web developers do the most nutty things possible in the browser performantly. And the way we can make that happen performantly is up to us, the operating system. And so, like, for example, speaking about ad code, I'm sure you all are aware a few months ago, all mobile browsers started allowing autoplay of video on the web. Where previously it was banned, like the autoplay attribute on a video tag was not allowed because it was considered to be a bandwidth hog. The problem is that if you give somebody a screwdriver to put in a nail, they'll find a way. And so what they ended up doing was downloading the video, showing the individual frames one at a time, and then loading the audio track separately. And so rather than actually have a performant video channel, you had to manually create this canvas-based video processor in JavaScript that was insanely unperformant instead of just kind of unperformant. And the hacks will come, and so being prescriptive on what should be allowed and what shouldn't be allowed, while we certainly do make some opinions, my personal stance is that in general we should allow whatever crazy things have to happen and just make them as optimized as possible. When Pat was on last week, he talked about one of the big things in Quantum was paving the cow paths, and I'm exactly the same position. Let web developers do whatever they want, and we'll figure out what the best things are and just make those even more performant. And so we're constantly analyzing and looking at, what are web developers doing today, and how can we take those patterns and make it even faster. A great example, we have Sean Larkin, the member of the Webpack team that most people know. I think he's the official mascot. And he has been working with the Chakra team to make sure that Webpack bundled code is optimized as fast as possible for our JavaScript engine. And so there are small little changes in the way that Webpack makes its code and how it prepares that code in order to that there are various changes that the Webpack team makes inside of Webpack prepared code that the Chakra team can look at and make as fast as possible. They can just check like, oh, this pattern exists, so let's make sure we optimize that because Webpack's popular and we'll probably hit it. And we do that all the time with popular libraries, whether or not they are currently performant. We just want to make whatever web developers are working on today as fast as possible.
And there's a lot of stuff to work on today. I mean, the API sort of infrastructure that has sort of come to the web through standards and a lot of face-to-face meetings has given developers a lot to work with. Whereas before, a lot of things, like to your point, right? A lot of those cowpaths and hacks and things that were terribly unperformant, you don't necessarily have to do anymore. We have things like the web components sort of meta grouping of standards coming.
Absolutely, yeah.
Service workers and push and things like that. I mean, what APIs is Edge sort of looking to in 2018? I mean, you guys have service worker and insider builds now, which landed in December. What else is sort of on the roadmap of things?
Sure. Well, biggest thing to mention if people aren't aware is that we actually do all of our product planning in the open. You can go to status.microsoftedge.com or uservoice.microsoftedge.com. Those are two pages we use. Status is what we use to show our current status on various features. And so you can look to see whether or not stuff is supported, under consideration, if it's available in preview, like Service Worker. If it's in development, like background sync is one that's coming up really soon for service workers. So you can do those kind of pushes in the background and have websites update even when the app isn't open. Or if something is just plain not planned on ever coming ever. All that data is open. It's available at status.microsoft.com, microsoftedge.com, I apologize. And also on GitHub. And then separately, quickly about the user voice thing, uservoice.microsoftedge.com is a website folks can go to submit ideas for the browser, whether it's completely new browser features or just, hey, please go implement, custom elements or web components. You can go there and you can vote on features, and we look to those to figure out what we should implement. We really trust the knowledge and the opinion of the public web developers, of the people that care about our browser. And so we regularly implement the top rated features that are up there in each version. As far as what's coming in the next year to our browser, there's a whole bunch of exciting things that are under work. You can check them out at status.microsoftedge.com, but things that I'm personally really excited about would probably be, like I said, the background sync API is one that I am really stoked for. You can have background sync and background push inside of your PWA. Gosh, what else is there?
Background sync is amazing. I just want to point that out. I too am super excited for background.
Well, the service worker support. I mean, it's not necessarily new, but that's super exciting that the Edge team is so on top of that.
Yeah, no, it's been wonderful to be a part of all of the service worker stuff. I think we announced that we were publicly starting work on it the day after I started on Microsoft Edge, and so I felt like my work was complete one day in. But it's really, really cool stuff. Another really exciting one that is coming up is the screen capture API. Basically, you're able to record or display parts of people's screens inside of it. It'd be really handy for podcast recording, as a matter of fact. But yeah, there's all kinds of stuff that's currently being worked on.
And then I think also a lot of like enhanced support around WebGL, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, WebGL is a really fun thing. It's completely insane. I am a self-taught web developer, and so I never went to any computer science classes. And so reading how WebGL works constantly melts my brain. But one of my former first bosses on Microsoft Edge, Frank Olivier, was a huge propeller head dude, like a nerd on WebGL, and was a member of the working group that helps manage it. And one of the things that I'm really excited about WebGL as a whole, not just on Edge, is we're actually basically all the major engines are conforming around this project called Angle, which is something that was originally from the from Google, from the Chrome team, but now all browsers are contributing to in one way or another, where it's effectively a single implementation of WebGL, which is wonderful because since WebGL is an instance of GL, meaning the OpenGL is commonly used for like video games or something, that means that all web browsers would have the same resulting code if you transpile your OpenGL or non-WebGL code over to WebGL. And so it just reduces the development burden for effectively just a target with WebGL to be identical across all browsers, which is a super exciting possibility for bringing more games and more advanced graphics to the web.
That is so
Always
exciting.
been difficult, it seems.
That is so huge, Patrick. Seriously.
Yeah. It's been wonderful. It's the Angle project is completely open source. I think github.com/google/angle. I had to guess. I'm sure we can get it in our show notes or whatever. But it's awesome. Yeah,
that's so cool. So I'm wondering, generally speaking, with Microsoft being very big in enterprise, there's actually kind of this it's very beneficial to kind of stay with the web platform, right? And also to kind of push forward things like web components, which are actually very enterprise friendly. So can you kind of shed on the support around web components and sure. And kind of where we are with the spec there?
Sure. Web components is fascinating. When did the spec first start? Was it 7 years ago now? It's been quite a while.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
I thought it was when I was born, but I keep forgetting that Alec Russell is not that much older than me, so it couldn't have been in the 80s. Couldn't have been in the 80s. That's okay.
Yeah, it's when it should have been, but unfortunately it wasn't. And so we're in an interesting place as a browser with web components because it's been around for a while, but at the same time there was slow uptick on it. And so it's we're as a browser that's kind of an interesting change. You see, there's all kinds of stuff that constantly gets thrown onto this specification wall, and things that we'll look and see at, and we go to and then immediately retreat. Object.observe is a common thing that can kind of be a scapegoat for this. You can look at for right after that Angular 1 pattern came out and everyone was super excited about it. Everyone wanted to look at object.observe as a way to observe objects changing. And then 6 months later, we decided to scrap the entire specification. And so we've been slow to work on web components, as is painfully aware by most people. And however, we are, considering all the different parts of web components. You can check out our official status on status.microsoftedge.com, not to plug it too many times. But in short, it's something that I personally am passionate about. I definitely want to see us work on, and I know we are laying groundwork to put in the steps required to get us to a place where we can fully support web components. We don't have anything officially to announce. It is a monumental amount of effort to completely change the way that a lot of our DOM engine works, the code that powers the DOM inside of the browser, in order to support full Shadow DOM and full web component features. It's something that a lot of our team is excited about, but we don't have an official date for anything that's shipping or anything like that. The best thing I can recommend, though, is that the more people use it on the web and the more people that vote on it on user voice, the more likely it is to show up. One of the reasons why we became much more of a high priority is because in the last 6 months, more and more websites started using web components. And as a result, we want Edge to be interoperable. If no one uses it, then we don't really think it's a high priority. If everyone uses it, then it's our highest priority. So if it's web components or something that are passionate about, don't wait until all browsers support it. Just start shipping it. Ship it in a way that doesn't break the experience for other browsers. But if it's slower, then that's honestly just more pressure on other browsers to implement those things.
Patrick, I couldn't have said
That
those
progressive
words.
story is very key.
Yeah, I couldn't have said those words better myself. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Really. Podge said the exact same thing yesterday. He's like it's super, it's like ultimately browsers are not this like endless honeypot of resources. Like people think like, oh, Microsoft is huge. Well, the Edge team is, Windows is now a small part of Microsoft, and Edge is a smaller part of Windows. Right. And so, it's not unlimited resources and finite, and definitely finite talent, right? And the number of browser engineers in the world are, just few and far in between. So in order to prioritize these features,
absolutely,
developers need to use them. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, in a perfect world, we'd implement literally everything possible, but I'd like to be able to finish my current workload before I die, let alone what's going to come up between now and then. And so it's, unfortunately, prioritization. And the more people that use the thing, the more likely we are to actually use it. One of the great parts about working at Microsoft on the browser is that we also have a search engine called Bing that can go out and crawl the entire web. And so we're able to spot patterns or features that are becoming more popular on the web automatically. And we can see, oh, this one feature is really big in, Southern Africa, or it's huge in all of Europe. And so we need to start looking into why that is and if we need to start supporting that feature. And so we have that kind of big data availability that's really, really awesome.
The way that the web has shifted in that regard, the idea of telemetry and using that to sort of figure out what people are using and sort of building towards those edge cases, it really has offered a lot of growth in that regard. I think people sometimes sort of skip over that portion that, oh, well, this spec is the top priority. Well, why is it the top priority? There's always a priority to something, but fundamentally, to your point, you have to, see what's being used out there. It is interesting to me too that since we've gotten to this point where there is a lot of collaboration between browser vendors, where a lot of people like to say, well, we're back into the browser wars, but to me it's less of a war and more of everyone's talking about implementing what the open web can be. So we get a lot of those primitives now, like service worker. We get things like WebAssembly, which allows us to build in the features that may become part of the browser or may not become part of the browser.
Absolutely.
These sorts of availability to browser developers have really sort of put us on a much more open collaborative course across not just browser vendors, but also framework developers and everybody else as we try to see where those patterns go. I mean, how are you guys looking at that collaboration? I mean, obviously you guys are building internally, but you're also dealing with things like documentation and standards and all the things.
Absolutely.
Like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess you can think of browser wars in a sort of, blog post headline catching way, but it's really the complete opposite of a war. I mean, honestly, some of my best friends work at other browsers. Nobody dislikes anybody. All of the browsers talk to each other constantly. Amal mentioned earlier that she's helping Edge work on our web platform tests. And if any of our listeners are unfamiliar, web platform tests is this phenomenal project that's been going on for a number of years now between literally all browser vendors, including Safari, which is an unusual one sometimes, but where we're all contributing all of our tests to specifications and making sure our engine passes those tests to one canonical repository that all of our browsers can then pull into our repos and then run. And so if Apple writes a test to check for Shadow DOM, when we start to implement it, we can automatically inherit all those tests and can run. And that way we'll notice if we happen to hit a new failure or edge case on the spec, we can contribute back. And then all the other browsers, it's a rising tide that rises all boats. It's this huge, wonderful collaborative effort that's been going on across all major browsers. It's really, really exciting time. It's, the browser wars, I think Ponch mentioned last week, one of the, it's great because we got so much new features back in the day, but the problem was it was a lot of actual competition in a negative sense of the word. Now the war isn't against other browsers. It's really just, to make sure that we have all of the web as a general is the best possible platform for developers if they choose it. I don't ever think that the web would completely displace native development or anything else. People should use whatever tool they're comfortable with for the job. But all of the browser folks that I work with are dedicated to making the web as powerful and as useful as an application process as possible.
So all this is really exciting news. As a developer, the most important thing to me on a browser is actually DevTools. And every time I have to go in to debug something, on Edge or on IE, I haven't had to do that in IE in a long time. But on Edge, I've noticed that while the browser is super fast, the DevTools seem to be literally a copy of IE. And so can you kind of just maybe shed some light on that and let developers know when they're going to be able to start having good experiences there?
Well, absolutely. So a little bit of fun history. Historically, Microsoft dev tooling was under one large team that effectively was publicly shown as the Visual Studio team. And so, what was it, 8-9 years ago when the F12 DevTools started coming out in IE, and the people and the powers that be said, we need DevTools for Internet Explorer. Let's give it to our DevTools team. And that happened to go over to Visual Studio rather than the web engine team. As a result, you had the Visual Studio team owning this piece of code that they didn't really have a need for. And it unfortunately showed in the end product. For a long time, we were certainly lagging behind on a lot of dev tooling. Ironically, our operating system dev tooling has been phenomenal. In fact, the Chrome dev tools were pretty heavily based off of the dev tools for writing Windows applications. Most of the timing, tracing, performance optimizations were pretty much copied nearly whole cloth from these Windows performance toolkits that are, even today we use to benchmark Edge. But, bringing it into what's coming out in 2018 and what's happening in the future, we have full control of the dev tools now, which is wonderful. And we have a big team that's constantly working on improving them. And so actually in the past, I'd say 6 months, we've had a number of large commits to the dev tools in Edge. It will not look like it's directly copied from IE any longer. And because it's not, is a huge fundamental rewrite of the underlying code. It's changing to an Inferno-based web app stack application. Inferno being kind of like a React-like project. And in fact, Jacob Rossi, one of my lovely coworkers who leads the DevTools team, did a great talk at the Edge Dev Summit a few months ago about all the work that was going into it and all the work that they'll be doing in the next few months. And I'd be happy to give you a link to that so people can watch, because it's a super informative piece on what's going on in dev tooling. The short answer is we all agreed that our dev tools needed a ton of improvement, and that's why we're doing a ton of improvement. We're really excited about what's coming out with them.
Oh, that is so cool. So, and I think for people who don't know this, Sean Larkin, Jesus of the Web / Webpack Webpack maintainer. Webpack maintainer is actually was recently hired to be the kind of Patrick's equivalent on the DevTools side. So, and he's extremely committed, just like Patrick is committed to web interop and web standards. Sean is super committed to good developer experiences. And so Sean is really he's I'm going to bring the sickest experiences ever to DevTools on Edge. Everybody watch out. Chrome watch out. Paul Irish watch out. In fact, there's a pinned, he has a pinned tweet saying Paul Irish watch out. It's so funny. But I'm really excited to see where that goes. And actually I had a question about Visual Studio Code integration in with debugging on Edge. Is that a thing, or is there a roadmap for it to be a thing?
Sure. So one of the main things that all dev tools have been trying to standardize on is the Chrome debugging protocol. So basically, for years now, you've been able to attach things like JetBrains or Visual Studio Code to Chrome in order to integrate with it and to directly, have your code be editable from within the browser, have the full power of your DevTools in a code editor. And it's just a JSON RPC protocol. So it's a really straightforward thing that anyone could look at and understand what's happening. And we've finally been getting some buy-in from all other browsers to basically start to make that a bit more stable and a bit more standardized so that it can work across all browsers. At the Chrome Dev Summit a few months ago, Chrome announced that they're going to support multiple sessions inside of it. So you'll be able to do stuff like attach your Visual Studio Code editor to Chrome, as well as having your DevTools in Chrome open simultaneously and be able to have a actually useful dev experience that way. And we're going to be supporting that same API inside of the Edge DevTools. And so you'll be able to, hook up Visual Studio Code or any other browser that can hook into Chrome's DevTools should be able to hook into Edge's DevTools. If not soon, then shortly thereafter.
It opens up a lot of possibilities because there's a lot of sort of tooling that's started to pop up around sort of CDP and things like Puppeteer and Lighthouse and everything else that are sort of driving sort of the way that we sort of the future of testing, sort of the way we performance validate our progressive web apps and everything else. And this has been a long time coming too. This was not, I know this has not been an easy conversation in terms of the face-to-face over the years. I know because I've asked many times only to being going, oh man, that meeting was fiery. So it's good to see that times of, again, we're moving forward on the web. This is
absolutely, it's very kumbaya nowadays. I'm luckily, I got to miss a lot of the really horrible pieces of the old days of the web. And speaking of tooling, the Chrome Dev CDP protocol is really cool because it can, you mentioned Lighthouse, the tool that can be used to scan websites and stuff. And one of the things that we actually use CDP for on our team is our project called SonarWall. Sonarwall.com, but it's effectively, it's kind of similar to Lighthouse, but in my opinion, it has a lot more features and a lot more flexible on what you're able to do with it. It's a really neat project that I actually think y'all could probably do an entire show about, but people should check it out. You can sort of thinking of it as linting for your entire website rather than just individual pieces.
I'm going to hold you to that. So we're going to have we're going to have a show on Sonar now. It is a very interesting tool. I think, and again, this is sort of the thing that's, you start to see these things come out, and a lot of people, when I go talking conferences and things these days, people are still going, well, it's Microsoft. Like, this is not the things that Microsoft produces. Like, why do I get to use, why is everyone moving to VS Code, and why is Edge now a thing that I can actually write code for and test in my usual cycle, and it all works? It is quite a shift for a lot of people. And what I think is interesting about that is that as time has gone on, since Edge has sort of come out of its gate, I hear that less now. Because, again, we've been around the web for a long time. And I hear a lot of, the newer set of web developers didn't have to deal with IE. They don't know about the sort of thing that we had to do to make IE do crazy stuff.
They never walked uphill both ways in the snow.
Well, it was funny. I was talking to Paul Baucus, who works at Google now, but before, Paul worked on jQuery UI for a number of years, and we were trading old IE hacks, like how to make IE do things that IE was kind of not supposed to do, but you needed it to do. And,
as you do, sure.
And it's funny because it struck me then. I mean, this was probably a year ago when we had this conversation, but I think it struck us both that there's going to be the new wave of developers who get to use these new tools and who are in this new browser ecosystem. They're not going to know those stories. They're not going to, like, that's the old history. Like, how old are you? That wasn't a thing. Is just a myth. That never really existed. And I think that's great. Like, fundamentally, I'm like, wow, the development experience as a whole in the web has gotten significantly better. And that goes to that collaboration, that goes to pushing the boundaries of tools like Sonar, making DevTools better across the board and interoperable with our tools that we're using. As 2018 sort of rolls along with sort of the Edge story of things, I mean, how do you see that ecosystem growing? I mean, what kind of, beyond the feature set, like as you're talking to developers out there, what are you hearing that, people are really sort of excited about these days?
Sure. Yeah. Stuff that, all kinds of things. You mentioned WebAssembly earlier. One of the super exciting things about WebAssembly is since it's a binary file, it's a completely separate target. It's assembly, ASM.js was literally just JavaScript. WebAssembly is the parsed version of that ASM file. But because it's a binary file, the language authors, the people that write JavaScript, can actually extend JavaScript in ways that will only be exposed inside of WebAssembly, which means that we can add more and more low-level features that'll be required to bring languages like, C++ or Objective-C or all these other, really gross non-webby languages to the web. We can add all these primitives to the language to make that run performantly and fast so that people can bring in all these awesome, projects or features onto the web without actually having to taint the larger JavaScript language, which personally, I'm really excited to see how that comes out and what people do with that. Another feature that I'm super excited for is Web Bluetooth and Web USB. They're effectively exactly what you would imagine. It's a JavaScript interface to Bluetooth or a JavaScript interface to USB. It's something that Chrome has currently shipped, and it's a really, really cool idea. I mean, imagine not having to install a weird random application to change your keyboard's keys. You can just load up a website that has the permissions to access it and be able to configure everything from a PWA or even just a website. It's something that is something I find really exciting, and a number of people I meet seem to be really excited about as well. All the service worker stuff that's landing, the fact that Safari Tech Preview has service worker now, and hopefully it will be in the next iPhone when it launches, is incredibly exciting. I mean, we can finally convince a whole bunch of bosses to let us work on PWAs, I think, and it's just the web is such a rich ecosystem now. And, I look back at, like you said, the hacks that used to have to happen just to get the simplest things possible, like rounded corners on a div or something. And it's amazing how much I can take for granted now, because the web has become, this wonderful paradise that we feels like it is today, at least compared with where I started.
Oh my gosh. So I couldn't agree with you more on your things that you're excited about list. Web Bluetooth is amazing. Web USB is also amazing. I was actually speaking at an IoT conference this past week, and I got to meet Suze Hinton there. She's a developer advocate at Microsoft.
Yeah.
And Lars was like giving her
Suze
web.
Is amazing.
Yeah. Well, I was there to witness like somebody handing a bunch of like web USBs to give to you. So did you receive them yet? Okay,
Yep.
good. That's awesome.
Yeah.
But a small world, right? I was like, oh, those are for Patrick. That's so cool.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering. So this is such an exciting time, and thank you so much for coming on the show. Like, I'm wondering if we can kind of briefly, before we wrap up, maybe just talk a little bit about your involvement with MDN, because Edge is collaborating with Mozilla now, and so is Google. For kind of building docs for the web. And could you share a little?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was, honored to be chosen along with Erica Doyle, one of the members of the Microsoft Tech Writing team, as a member of the MDN board, as was mentioned a couple of times on your show in the past. A few months ago, all of the major browsers decided to come together and basically agree that MDN is the canonical source for web documentation. And so we all want to get together and work on a one singular place. And so rather than having a whole bunch of different random sites that can have that stuff, we're all going to put all of our writing efforts directly into MDN. Eric and I on the board we actually just met a few weeks ago in London to have a face-to-face and talk about all kinds of priorities. If people want to know more about what we do, you can check it out. We're extremely open about everything. It's MDN or github.com/MDN/PAB, PAB as in Boston. And yeah, it's just really cool. We all get to come together and think, what are the best ways that all of the different companies that represent web browsers and web developers can do the best thing for web developers? How can we work together to make this documentation site absolutely as best as possible? So, we're looking into integrating it directly into DevTools or directly into code editors so that, imagine when you're writing out your code inside of VS Code, you have a little IntelliSense pop-up that says like, hey, this only works in Chrome, or, like, hey, this feature's been obsolete. So 2 years, you can probably no longer have to include this, weird selector hack for IE7 anymore. There's all kinds of really exciting possibilities with the data and what kind of tool set we can do. But it is early days, and so we're just figuring out what's the best and most impactful thing we can do.
Oh, that's so cool. And to give developers a sense of like the Edge ecosystem and just really all the places that Edge is, can you shed some light on like where where users are running Edge and what platforms are running that Edge supports?
Sure. Right. So I mentioned before there are the two Edge teams. There's Edge HTML, my team, and then there's Edge App. Edge HTML is a run inside of what's called a Universal Windows Platform app, or UWP app. So what that means is that Edge runs on Windows 10 desktop. It'll run on the Xbox. It will also run on Windows mobile devices, and obviously tablets or anything in between that run Windows 10. And then there's also the Edge app team, who, in addition to making all the applications for Edge, they also have recently launched Edge for iOS and Edge for Android. And those are wrappers around the respective platforms' rendering engines. So it's not using the Edge HTML rendering engine. It's using either Chrome or whatever your default web engine is on Android, or Safari on iOS, or WebKit. And what's great about it is that it can do stuff like automatically sync your bookmarks, your browser history, your favorites, all these things that we just make the user experience much more seamless. That's where you can have that experience on the go on mobile. We want to have a browser no matter where users are for the most part. And so especially on mobile phones. And so that's why they put such a huge amount of effort into the work that came in with those mobile applications. And I really encourage folks to try them out. They're really neat products, and they're awesome. So check it out.
Oh, that's awesome. So it's been so much fun hearing about Edge. Microsoft is like the company to watch in 2018, I think, but Edge is the browser to watch, absolutely, and has been for a while. And I'm not just saying that because I'm working on it. Okay, it's and they have a cool PM named Patrick. So as we wrap up, Patrick, where can developers learn more about Edge? We're going to link to all of the things that we discussed in the show notes,
Sure.
But
Right. There's basically a lot of things .microsoftedge.com. There's status.microsoftedge.com to check our implementation status of various features. There's uservoice.microsoftedge.com for people to go in and use their voice to either vote on a feature or let us know what they want to see on the web. You can go to bugs.microsoftedge.com to report a bug, give us a reproduction, and we'll get that fixed for you. There's changelog.microsoftedge.com. You can get a much more granular update on what's possibly coming up. Blog.microsoftedge.com. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of microsoftedge.coms basically, and we'll get them all in the show notes. But yeah, and then by all means, you can reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at Patrick Kettner on every social media platform: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, MySpace. If it exists, I try and get my name on it. I'm very friendly. Feel free to reach out, email me, or hell, call me if you feel free to leave my phone number on the business card if you post it, Justin, because I'm an open book. I can block people if I get spams. It's not a problem. So
just random people calling you in the middle of the night. Why doesn't this feature work?
Oh, I've had worse. I mean, that happens with my boss anyway, right? So it's totally fine. Yeah, no. And then, another random tidbit that I'd love to throw in is this project that we came up with, hashtag Edge bug on Twitter. If you ever find, basically a lot of web developers find bugs constantly in web browsers. We're human, but they don't always have the time to go through the effort to file a bug report on what's going on. And so a coworker of mine, Greg Whitworth, created this awesome project where we have a bot that monitors Twitter mentions for the hashtag Edge bug. And if it comes up with that and it has a link inside of it, we'll automatically file a bug report for you automatically just on Twitter. You just have to do it with a tweet, and it gets into our triage thing, and we'll try and get it fixed even faster. You don't have to go through a whole bunch of form submissions in order to get there. So another awesome one.
Wow.
Contribute to the web today, people. Yes.
It's almost like you're like, yeah, we know you hate filing bugs because the Chromium interface is like nightmares, gives everybody nightmares, so let's yeah, it's pretty bad. I'm actually almost
all bug tracking systems are terrible. Let's just all admit it now.
Or Mozilla's, yeah, Mozilla's is pretty scary too, but I think Chromium's is like the most scary, and mainly because of the Well, I think it's the abyss of like open bugs that makes it the most scary, because you're just like, is my little bug gonna get any attention? It's like there's like a million bugs ahead of me. Anyways,
absolutely. Yeah, and you know what? If anybody out there is listening and has an edge bug, feel free to reach out to me. I can't guarantee I'll help it get fixed, but I can certainly give you a real world. I can be a face for bugs. So by all means, reach out to me. We're people. We love talking to people. So let me know what's going on, and I'll try and help.
You may regret that statement, Patrick.
Never.
But no, Patrick, it's been so awesome. Thank you so much. Really, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Justin, do you want to take us out?
Sure. This has been episode number 153 of the Web Platform Podcast. Today we've been talking about Microsoft Edge, what's going on in 2018 with Mr. Patrick Kettner. Tune in next week when we continue our travels through browsers, where we have more browser vendors on to talk about what's going on in 2018. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Be sure to reach out to us on Twitter. And remember, if you sign up for the newsletter, you can be entered to win one of those daydreams that apparently Danny posted on Twitter, which stacked up. So do check that out. And we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your week.